Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Factory Must Grow, episode 39. Joining us on the line today is Galdoc. How are things today, Galdoc?
Doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm doing okay. You've been getting a little bit over a sickness, so that's why we're doing a off Monday stream. But otherwise, healthy enough to talk about fun things.
So yeah, I'm still a little bit under the weather. So if you hear me sneeze or cough something, then just sorry, I'm
We'll
human.
just judge
Turns
you
out.
harshly. It'll be great.
Okay, cool.
All right.
I'll accept that.
So today on the cast, as usual, we'll start with a mod spotlight, and then I've got an announcement, and then we'll dig into our main topic today, which is a puzzle, we shall say. So first, I want to thank the show's patrons. This show is possible because of you, the listeners. If you'd like to support the podcast, head over to patreon.com/Krydax. I do have a little bit of a major announcement. Those of you that follow the podcast might have noticed that it missed an episode 2 weeks ago, and that is because I'm going through some pretty serious life emergencies, some serious life stuff that is not normal, and I just wanted to let you guys know, as the listeners, that things are pretty much in flux for me still. Nothing's landed. I'm not sure where they'll land. For now, the plan is to continue the podcast as normally scheduled from here, but I cannot give any for sure guarantees. I don't really know what my life and schedule is going to look like in the coming weeks. So one thing that may have to change is the time that the cast happens. Hopefully it can continue. My plan is to continue it, but I cannot necessarily promise that. So I'll be able to give more updates in a channel update on my Krydax channel on YouTube, probably in a couple weeks. So you guys can keep an eye out for that, to get some more details when I have details to release and I'm in a place where I can release them publicly. But for now, just thank you guys for your patience is all I have to say with that. And I'm excited to get into today's podcast. So our mod spotlight for today is Freezer. This is a Factorio mod, and because I've been dealing with a pretty static list of mods for my Pi series, Pyanodons, I kind of have to just go on the mod portal and look for mods to highlight for this section. Or I go off recommendations from people sometimes, but I found one called Freezer that looks really interesting. It's by Est Gamer. It was created about 8 months ago, so not too long after Space Age's release, and it has about 4,000 downloads. And it's a mod that gives you some options around spoilage, because as many know, once you make a spoilable item, the timer is ticking, and there is no way to stop or slow that clock. But the Freezer mod allows you to do a few things, one of which is it allows you to create refrigerators that will slow spoilage or pause spoilage completely. I think they might be freezers. And what's cool about it is it requires more power on hotter planets, so it makes use of the planetary temperature, which I think is kind of neat.
That's actually
Yeah,
clutch.
and then you can also
like that
turn.
sort of immersion.
What's that?
Yeah, I like that sort of immersion. I like that.
Yeah, exactly.
The little additions like that make me a lot more willing to play with certain mods. So
Well, and
yeah,
Factorio Space Age, for all of its properties that it puts on planets, doesn't really make use of them, which I didn't love.
no, right?
Like, it adds all these numbers that make you think numbers are going to matter, but at the end of the day, the only thing Space Age does is it's this binary cutoff of like, oh, you're only allowed to make this thing on planets that have a pressure of greater than 1,000 whatevers, and there's only one planet that has that. So they might as well just say you're only allowed to make this on Fulgora or whatever.
Right.
So
The hook in there would normally be for mods, kind of as you're seeing right now.
Right.
But they
And I
didn't do
like
enough of it
that, but it
until
also
here.
feels weird to put a lot of systems in a game that are basically useless for the game that you've created and the experience you've tailored for players. It would make more sense to have those things exist under the hood rather than show them to the player when they don't really matter. Anyway, I digress.
Yeah.
Back to the freezer mod, the main thing that you can do is turn water into ice, and then you have a crafting recipe to encase spoilables into an ice cube. And then that slows their rate of spoilage by a configurable amount. I think it's 5x by default. So they last 5 times longer when they're in a block of ice. And so you can ship those blocks of ice around to other places and have more time. Or you could put your science into blocks of ice, so then when it finally gets to your science plant, it hasn't spoiled as much, so you end up with more science, that sort of thing. It seems like a neat mod. Allows you to kind of spend some complexity and setup and energy to counteract some of the spoilage stuff. It seems probably useful, especially for mods with spoilage. I don't know how well it works with modded playthroughs, but I think I'd be interested in using it if I did another run of Space Age with a few light mods. It seems like a good kind of light mod to add on to Space Age as a fun little, like maybe with some planet mods and this mod and a few other, kind of putting together like your own little vanilla mod pack light type thing. So yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, and there was another thing it could dovetail in with, which was not space age but space exploration, where, if I'm not mistaken, having like frozen ice from space is actually very useful because some planets have no water and no water-based recipes can be made on there. And what you have to do is you have to import ice and literally melt it in order to power some of the like water turbines or anything else you want to do.
Right.
And I remember we actually had an argument about like, well, why can't he make a refrigerator or a freezer? And they were like, well, because this is special ice. And
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at some point the lore breaks down. It has to.
And that's okay. It's all right.
Yeah, exactly. So today's main topic is actually going to be about puzzle games and genres and mechanics, because Galdoc and I both are puzzle game lovers, and we think that many of the audience of this podcast also are puzzle game lovers, because Factorio and automation games, in a large sense, are a bit of a overlap or extension of a type of puzzle game. And there are actually some puzzle games that could arguably be somewhat in the automation genre even. Some of the Zachtronics games even, we'll get into that. But Logistics with Belts, that's a puzzle, right? Like, I don't know if you guys have ever played the game called Flow, and there's a million other games like it where you connect colored dots on a grid, and you have to connect like the blue to the blue and then the yellow to the yellow, but you can't overlap anything. That's basically belts, right? That's what you do with belts in Factorio, before you have undergrounds, at least. You're doing the same thing, right? Like, that is a puzzle. There's a math puzzle with ratios and rates, trying to get like, 3 of this building to 2 of that building, and half of it goes over here and a third of it goes over there. Right? Like, there's a lot of puzzles in Factorio. There's the grid puzzle of just how you put all your buildings together and how you shape your builds, and if you're trying to make them more space efficient. There's kind of the mental feeling of solving a puzzle when you figure out kind of, how am I going to do this build, right? Whether it's like in Pyanodons, there's a lot more puzzles of like, I have 3 different ways I could do something, and which way is most efficient given my circumstances. But even in something like Space Age, there's a lot of puzzles to solve, and it's not quite the puzzle of like, it's a puzzle with a solution, and I'm trying to find the intended solution, and once I've found it, there's nothing more for me to gain there. It's a bit more open-ended. But my point is just that automation games, and Factorio in particular, have a lot of overlap with the puzzle genre. And so we thought it'd be fun to talk about the more dedicated puzzle games as a fun kind of side topic, and something that would be interesting.
Yeah, they a lot of that overlap comes about as because of the fact that these are very cerebral games. There's a lot of thinking involved. I'm not at all downplaying any other type of game, but like when I would play Quake back in my college days, that was more of Twitch gaming. I mean, there was strategy involved. You had to go to these certain places and stuff, but it was Twitch like skill gaming. Like, you had to 360 no scope or whatever.
Right.
But in these games tend to be much more, you have to plan out, you have to think, you have to remember, you have to strategize in a sort of like, longer time frame. So there is, I would imagine, a lot of overlap. I know that like my wife and I love puzzle games. There's a particular kind of puzzle game we do like playing together. There are some that doesn't really make as much sense. Like, I'm thinking we'll kind of get to that. But like, we just absolutely adore puzzle games. So this is going to be an interesting topic for today. Got a lot to say.
Yeah, let's jump in. So I think what we'll do, just as kind of a little bit of structure, though I'm sure given it's Galdoc and I, we're going to go all over the place in all of these sections. But first we'll talk about of some of the greater genres of puzzle games. And by no means this is an exhaustive list, and by no means is it like, are you going to agree with all of our delineations? It's more just for helpfulness of conversation than it is for like, we're trying to establish a compendium of puzzle genres. I'm sure there's better ones out there, but we just want to have some words to kind of explain, because there are many different types of puzzle games. So the first one, which is kind of the most obvious one, is the actual physical puzzles, right? Like literal puzzles where you put together puzzle pieces. That is a puzzle, right? That's the word we use for it. There are things like mazes on paper. There are Rubik's Cubes. There are Sudokus. There are, all of the booklets that you can get of like puzzles. There are even logic puzzles. There are books full of logic puzzles, right? So that there's a lot of physical puzzles that exist. Galdoc on camera has his, what is that, a 15 by 15 or something?
13 by 13.
13 by 13. I was close. It was a rough estimate. So obviously, like, those are a form of puzzle. And often there are digital versions of those things, right? There's lots of online Sudoku. There's lots of online Rubik's Cube solvers with even non-physically possible Rubik's Cubes, like 4D Rubik's Cubes and stuff. There's
that cell phone app.
crosswords. There's Minesweeper. There's a classic digital puzzle that, like, everybody, that's our age grew up with. I say our age. I know you're a little older than me, but we're close enough.
It's okay, Sonny.
Exactly. So that's one category. Is kind of just this idea of like physical, basic puzzle ideas that, like, if you were to take something on a road trip, non-digitally, you could take some puzzles with you.
And I kind of think of these as like straightforward. You can see exactly what the goal is. You know exactly what you're dealing with, and your job is to connect the two to get to in some kind of solved path. And you do it. There's no mystery to it. In AI, you would say this is a something where you have full knowledge of the state of the environment, and then can be an agent operating in that. It's very basic. It's straightforward. There's a lot of words you could use, but that's sort of,
yeah.
Oh, that's a Hanayama, isn't it?
Another form of these puzzles I'm holding on camera. You guys can't see it, but it's where you have like a bunch of, there's one where there's like nails in a horseshoe and they're all like connected and you have to figure out how to move them to disconnect them. That's another fun kind of puzzle. So that's one major category. The next one is kind of I call them hard puzzle. And this is more thinking, now we're on to like video game puzzles. And by hard, I don't mean difficulty. I mean, like, it's a firmly like cerebral puzzle, kind of that straightforward idea that Galdoc was talking about. So games that I'm thinking of here are games like Bombe is You, where it's turn-based, right? In Bombe, like, the turns happen when you move Bombe, and so there's no like skill needed other than the arrow keys, and it's all about
time-dependent skill. Yeah,
there's no timing pieces, and it's all about the logic of it, right? Like, if you can figure out the solution, then you can do the solution, and each room is kind of its own puzzle. Often these games have levels, right? I solved level 1, or worlds and levels combined often, but it's like, I solved 1-2, how did you solve 3-4? Like that kind of game. Patrick's Parabox is another example. Hexcells, which is a bit more of a Sudoku-y, Minesweeper-y type game. Sudoku variants, which aren't a literal video game, but if anyone knows about the Cracking the Cryptic channel, I highly recommend it.
Oh my gosh. So good.
Yeah, Cracking the Cryptic is great, and Sudoku variants offer a lot of, again, it's not quite a video game, but you can do them on your computer, and they offer much more. If you're not into Sudoku, I still recommend checking out variant Sudoku, and the reason is that Sudoku is not inherently a game about numbers, and you might call me crazy. You might be like, what? It's literally a grid of 81 numbers, Krydax. But it's not. You could use shapes. You could use 9 different fruits and play Sudoku, and it wouldn't be any different. Because the numbers are irrelevant. A 9 is no different than a 1. Like, you could switch all the 1s and 9s in any Sudoku puzzle, and it would be the same puzzle. The logic that you would need to use to solve it is exactly the same. The fact that they're 1 and 9 are irrelevant. You could use the letters A through whatever the 9th letter is. Sure. So my point is, variant Sudoku almost always has some form of logic. I mean, not literally all of them, but most of them have some logic that's related to the actual numbers themselves. So, for example, cages is a common variant of Sudoku, and it's a little dotted box around maybe like 3 or 4 cells or 5 cells, and it tells you the sum of that cage. Like, if you added up all the numbers in that cage, they add to 10. And if it's 4 boxes, it has to be the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, now the numbers matter, and it brings in a whole nother level. And that's just one rule. There are dozens of these variant rules, and there are tons of puzzles where puzzle creators make up their own rules. So I highly recommend variant Sudoku, even if you're not into regular Sudoku.
I could jump in here for a second, there
Yes,
was
please
one thing
do.
I wanted to add to that to dovetail, because one of the things that you probably found in I'm going to say it wrong. I always want to say Sudoku or some whatever.
Sudoku.
Sudoku. Yeah. It's Japanese. Sudoku. Anyways, the idea is that when you play these things from like whatever the newspapers or whatever your little phone app is, a lot of those puzzles are sort of randomly generated. Whereas the variant Sudokus, they are. Hold on one second. Okay, fine, really quick. The variant Sudokus are like, just hold on one second.
Uh-huh.
You have it?
Yeah, I think what he's getting into is that they're handcrafted.
They're handcrafted. They have constructors. Sorry, and those are very interesting experiences, because the way it usually plays out is that you have sort of a leading edge of what cells you're working on at any given time, and that leading edge is something that the constructor is guiding around, and at a certain point you'll make some kind of realization that the clues that you've gotten in combination give rise to some logical conclusion that you go, whoa, and then you get that dopamine hit of I figured it out. And
It's
this
called
is
the
something that
break-in.
yeah. And it's not something that I usually get from just regular Sudokus. You kind of can, but and there are some constructed ones that are also that way. But like the constructed ones are just really, really interesting, because you figure something out and you go, wow, that was really interesting.
Exactly.
So,
And I think that's
I know
actually a
I'm
good point that connects it to video game puzzles a bit more, because when you play a video game puzzle game, it is a handcrafted experience. We'll get to all sorts of other titles, but something like Portal, right? Like the levels are handcrafted, and there's a cool feeling you get when you figure out the breakthrough that your mind needed. Now I'm thinking with portals, right? Like you figured out the breakthrough you needed to solve that room. These variant Sudokus, because they're crafted by humans, and often it's called the solve path. And good puzzles might have some flexibility in the solve path, but often you have to sort of understand what they were going for and have that breakthrough in understanding. And that does feel a little bit like when you're playing some of these video games as well. And it's very different than just randomly generated, Sudokus on a newspaper.
Yeah.
So those are the hard puzzle games, or crunchy logic puzzle is another.
Yeah, that's the way I think of it personally.
Phrasing Galdoc used. Bonus points. The oldest one I remember playing at a young age was Chip's Challenge. So if that unlocks any memories for anybody, go play Chip's Challenge. It still exists. But that was another almost like Baba Is You type game, where the turn would happen when you would move the character, and it was very specific solutions. You got to go over here to get this key, dodge this enemy, unlock this door, stuff like that.
Indeed. Yeah, no, I'm trying to remember some of the other ones from my childhood, but there were a bunch like it. And it was, you play enough of them, you start seeing some of the design patterns, but like even still, they're still fun.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing
So walk us through our next category, Galdoc.
So the next category I sort of consider to be like level plus gimmick puzzles. They're kind of like room puzzles. Essentially, you have a sequence of rooms. Sometimes you might have multiple that you could go to at any given time, but typically they're things where you go into the room and you have to figure out some way through. Think Portal and Portal 2, where obviously they've broken them up into chambers, and at a certain point usually there's you break out of the rooms, and then you got to go do some like somewhat free roaming. It's really usually still on rails at a certain there's usually only one path forward still somewhat linear, I think, but the idea being that like there's essentially one thing to do in that room, and that is to get through. You do have other variants of this, like an Antichamber, where the game Antichamber is very, very non-Euclidean geometry. They use portals, but they don't use it in the sense of like you're shooting things on walls and trying to figure out where to place them. Rather, they are features of the universe, and you simply walk through them and you don't even realize you've gone through it, because it was a seamless transition, which essentially makes it a very non-Euclidean thing, where you can like run around a pillar, for example, and as you run around, you're going to different rooms and you don't know. But in the game just takes you there and you have to figure this out. There's the Talos Principle, which deals with like laser puzzles. There's Superliminal, which deals with perspective puzzles. There's Manifold Garden, which is kind of all these things put together. And all of these games, there's essentially some overarching theme to what you're doing. Maybe you're dealing with non-Euclidean geometry. There's chromagun, where you're dealing with colors. You're essentially dealing with a flavor of something, and they pack puzzles in there in some way. The
Yeah.
Talos Principle doesn't just make it linear. There's a sequence that you can go to, and it kind of branches out. It has meta puzzles where you can find like hidden collectibles in various places. And there are ones where you have to find enough of them to get some sort of overarching puzzle to come together. And it also is another game where the rewards from a puzzle are elements of another puzzle. So,
Right.
yo, dog.
But at
heard
the
you
end
like
of the
puzzles.
day, I think
No puzzles in
one
your
thing that kind of defines this genre is the puzzles are often putting together a few logical pieces. Like in Portal, you're in a room and you have 3 different pieces you can move, maybe. And it's like, okay, I have these 3 objects, and there is some combination of these 3 objects plus putting my portals in some combination of locations that will solve me the puzzle. Like, and these are puzzles where the solution could almost always be represented very easily in a bullet pointed list, like a numbered list of step 1, do this, step 2, do this, step 3, do this, you've solved the puzzle. Like, and that, I think if you can't easily define the solution that way, then it's probably not this category of puzzle in some ways.
I'm thinking of there was one called Portal Prelude, which is a mod for Portal, and it has a whole bunch of puzzles where the solution is you have to do like pixel perfect stuff, which is what led me to give it the moniker Now You're Thinking with Pixels. That kind of falls into this category. You can still put the bullet points down, but it adds some elements that sort of kind of pull it from this category a little bit. But
yeah,
just
I do want to mention Portal Reloaded as well. I think a lot of people don't know about that one, and that is a very high quality, incredible community made mod for Portal 2. And so I highly recommend playing Portal Reloaded if you haven't. It's basically more Portal 2. It adds a 3rd type of portal.
Yeah.
I won't spoil exactly what it does. It's a little bit less. It's not like you have 3 different colors of portal. It's a different type of portal, but it's just one more, gimmick that adds more puzzling good stuff.
Sorry, why?
So the next category then is kind of I don't know the best thing to call it, but I'm calling it surreal puzzle because the game feels a bit surreal when you play it. And I would actually argue that in some ways Manifold Garden fits into this more just because of the visuals of Manifold Garden are so, it's like MC Escher, but infinite fractal level of like, it's just a very surreal looking game, but the actual puzzling of Manifold Garden isn't that crazy. Antichamber is definitely a surreal type game because, like you said, you can walk down a hallway and you turn around and it's not the hallway you just walked from. Like it's very mind bending in a way that once you get into it, it's just an amazing journey. Another game that fits into this is Lingo. I didn't feel like Lingo fit into the room puzzle because it's not just a room puzzle. In Lingo, you don't walk into a room, solve a puzzle, and then go to the next level. It's very much an open world. You're solving, and it's word puzzles, so they're not hard, crunchy puzzles like logic puzzles. They're more trying to figure out word structure, and you're trying to figure out how things connect and how do you know what words are going on what blocks. It's a really cool game. It's really hard. I never beat it, but I highly recommend Lingo.
I didn't know about it.
Yeah, Galdoc, I bet you'll love Lingo. Once you finish Blueprints on stream, you should play Lingo on stream. It's really fun.
Well, there's another game on stream that you've told me that I need to play before that we'll get to in a moment.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. So there are probably more games.
This is in my wish list now.
Yeah, there are probably more games that fit into the surreal category, but that I do feel like it kind of deserves a slightly separate category than just room puzzles.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like also Parallax. Parallax is one where you're kind of like you're running upside down and stuff. And it's things like that I mean, it's a little bit of a loose category, but it's if you've played a game that fits in that category,
Yeah. All right, what's our next one?
So we have the next one, which is the one that my wife and I love to play. Oops, there's my camera. So this one is defined by oh, hang on one second. I think my camera. Remember at the very beginning of the stream when I said is it working? Okay,
it's working.
My camera's been giving me some trouble, so I do apologize. My wife and I love playing these kinds of games, and my personal take on it is I call them Mystlikes. I'm gonna make sure my little monitor is not working. Sorry, camera is still doing its thing. I call these things Mystlikes, And that's because Cyan, which was founded by Rand and Robin Miller, I think that's their names. Basically, they made Myst, and they made a company called Cyan. And it was a game where you may have heard of this, depending on how old you are. Some of the younger generation may not have. But the idea is you've been plunked onto an island with no context. Like, it's the ultimate no context. You don't even know what you're doing here. And so you go around the island and you see there's some switches and there's buttons that you can press. Nothing does anything, by the way. And it's quite a surprise when you actually interact with something and the world changes in some way. And you're like, whoa, what was that? And you gradually have to piece together what even is the goal of the game. Like, part of the game is literally figuring out what you are doing there. And some of these questions go unanswered. But the general way I like to think about these is that there are in environments, it rewards exploration, it rewards keeping notes, it rewards putting things together and collating information. It rewards a little bit of, I don't want to say like guesswork, but it does reward experimentation.
Yeah. I was going to say experimenting.
So when I say experimentation, I don't mean sitting there and being like, okay, I have a 5-digit number. Let's go A. Okay, A, B. No. But I mean, like, you have a theory, a hypothesis, and you test it to see if it works. And it's very, very fun. Other games that we've played have been things like we played Myst 1 through 3. We still haven't done 4 and 5. We did play Oru, but we didn't finish that one. We did Obduction. There's Riven. We have not done Outer Wilds. We'll talk about that in a second. But we did do The Witness. And recently we've been doing Blueprints. Do we want to go into that right now, or do we want to wait
in a little bit? Yeah, we'll talk.
Okay.
We'll dive into the games a little bit more later. I think Blueprints is about halfway in this category because it also has a lot of mechanics that aren't normally in this category. Like the Blueprints is almost like a board game sort of mixed with this category. It's really interesting. So it's like a roguelike board game mixed with a journey puzzle game like Mystlike, because there's a lot of lore that you're learning and there are rules to the world that you're learning that feel a bit like a Mystlike, but it's a bit like a board game roguelike in terms of the actual mechanics of the game that you're experiencing, which are very different than things like Myst. There's nothing like that in Myst. So it's maybe halfway in that category. Outer Wilds is also about halfway in this category because there are elements that feel a bit Myst-like and there are elements that are unique to Outer Wilds. We'll talk a little bit about Outer Wilds, but not too much because I don't want to spoil anything.
I haven't played it. Everyone's told me I need to play this game, and I'm kind of excited now.
A lot of the audience hasn't played it, I'm sure, and I don't want to spoil anything. Okay. Outer Wilds is the type of game that you really don't want to hear anything about it before you play. It's just the less you know when you start playing, the better, and you should have a great experience. There are some people that didn't like it, but most people love it, right? It's overwhelmingly positive on Steam for a reason, and it's always talked about for a reason. It is a unique game that is a unique experience, and if you'll know if you like it after a few hours of gameplay, but give it at least that much time. So the next category is Zachtronics. I love this category, and it's called Zachtronics, kind of like Mystlikes, because it really was one publisher, Zach, plus I think he had a team. I don't know if he had a team at the very beginning that created these games. And they're sort of halfway the hard puzzly type games like, Baba Is You, but they often involve some sort of programming in your solution. And I don't necessarily mean programming as in writing code, but you are often creating some sort of machine that operates on timed rules that then will move things around to create some sort of solution. So the first game that existed was actually a Flash game, which I discovered back when it was made. So I feel like I'm like a hipster Zachtronics lover because a lot of people don't even know this game existed.
I liked it before it was cool.
Exactly. It's called Codex of Alchemical Engineering. And you would program, you kind of had a grid, and there were elements and they were kind of the alchemical elements. So mercury and gold, aqua vitae and stuff like that. And you would combine those to create other reagents, and that would be your goal. So you'd have a goal of you connect the red one with the blue one and they have to attach with a certain bond, and then you move them over here. And you'd have to figure out programming your arms in a system of extend forwards and then turn right and then turn left and then pull backwards and then grab. And it would do that cycle of 5 operations constantly. And you would program each of the little arms with their instructions, and then you'd hit go. And then maybe it would work, maybe it wouldn't. And then you could rewind and say like, okay, that didn't work. So I need to program my arms a little differently so they work in tandem with each other. Otherwise, things crash into each other and it breaks. And that is a Zachtronics game. And Codex of Alchemical Engineering was the first. And then the first real game, quote unquote, real game that was like on Steam was Space Chem, which had a very similar vibe. And you would have these little things, I forget what they were called, but they would move around and grab objects and combine them and move them. You would create the machines on the floor that would do the combining, and then you would program the little thingies to move around and grab at different rates and such. And more recently, Zach came out with Opus Magnum, or Magnum Opus. I think it's Opus Magnum. Right. Yeah.
You're right.
And that one is kind of like the ultimate version of Codex of Alchemical Engineering. It has the arms, it has the same ideas. It's on a hex grid instead of a regular grid. So I highly recommend Opus Magnum as like a first Zachtronics. And then my personal favorite, though, is Infinifactory. That is like a 3D version of an Opus Magnum style. You have different blocks. It almost feels like a combination of Factorio and Minecraft, but with a puzzle spin, because you have these belts and lasers to weld things, or cutters to disconnect things, or lasers to destroy things, and you have to create some final piece, that's the thing you deliver, out of a bunch of various inputs. So it's very similar to Opus Magnum in that way, but it's 3D and it feels more factory-ish, and there's a lot of levels that are, it continually challenges your brain to think in new ways. So I highly recommend Infinifactory. And then in the Zachtronics category, there's all of the coding, their actual coding games where you write code. And that's things like Exapunks, TIS 100, Shenzhen IO. There's a few other games that I don't know the name of in the Zachtronics category, but I've only played Exapunks in the actual programming ones where you write code, because that's pretty easy pseudocode style. But if you're into actual coding, that will probably be up your alley.
I have in my Steam I categorize my games on Steam, and I literally have Zachtronics. There's Exapunks, Mobius Front 83, Infinifactory, Molex, Syntez.
Yeah, that's another coding one, I think.
Yeah. And then there's literally a game called Zach-like, which is wasn't made by Zachtronics, but it's a collection of Zach-likes. I also like to add in that there is an element of optimization here. And this is how I personally categorized it in my brain, which was when you solve these things, not only do you have to solve them, you're then told at the end where your solution ranks in 3 different areas. Usually it's something like time, cost, because the elements of your construction has some kind of a cost. And then there's some kind of spatial element, depending on what the context is. And either way, it's interesting because not only does that let you solve the problem, but if you're like me and you kind of obsess over that sort of thing, it gives you even more depth, because you can go in and say, you know what, I'm going to solve this again, but now I'm going to do it, and I'm going to try to get to the bottom of the curve, because like it'll show you where you fall on this like histogram, and for your particular solution, and you can be like, oh wow, someone did this in like 2 steps or whatever. Right. Oh, I'm going to try that. So it gives you a lot of replay value. So I don't know. The whole Zachtronics was an absolutely brilliant category.
Yeah.
And I will forever be tickled at the fact that I was able to think about, I used to program graphing calculators. And the fact that there's a game that is literally programming graphic calculators is just great to me.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, like you said, the optimization is a big like secondary element where you don't have to. For example, like I never got super into optimizing my Zach puzzles. I just wanted to beat the level. Once I beat the level, sometimes I would be like, oh, I can make that so much better if I make this one tweak, and I would go do that. But I wouldn't sit there and play the same level for like 5 hours trying to get the perfect solution. Yeah. I would just go on to the next level, because there are so many levels to solve that even beating the game where all you did was solve each puzzle once is already hard enough. And actually optimizing these puzzles, but I think that element of the game works really well for people who are like programmers, who are like, you have to optimize your code in real life to be like, I want as little compute time as possible, and I want it to be written in as few lines as possible, right? And so it emulates actually coding, even in the non-coding games like Opus Magnum or Infinifactory, it emulates some of the same things you do. And I think Factorio players are often doing the exact same thing. They're trying to optimize their footprints. They're trying to decrease the amount of time it takes to get from point A to point B, whether that's distance or by adding more crafters so you have a faster rate. There's a lot of overlap there.
A ton. So much so that I've even dreamt of making an add-on that puts something like that in there, but I have not quite gotten it to work yet.
Zachtronics in a Factorio, like Factorio mod?
Literally, yes. I
love
have
it.
an idea for it, and it could be possible, but right now the engine has technical limitations that have made it impossible, and so I have the idea sitting on a shelf.
Interesting. That's so cool. And there's another game I do want to talk about later called Bombe, which has an E on the end of the word bomb. I don't know if that's pronounced Bombe or just bomb, but either way, Bomb is the bomb. It is a really cool game. I want to talk about it later, but I think that also sort of fits in the Zachtronics category a little bit. So let's move on. What's our next category?
So we got the physics puzzle, and the physics puzzle game is kind of like Polybridge or catching this water or catching sand. Some of these are kind of fuzzy in terms of their puzzleness. I've played games where you have to like fling this sharp thing and it cuts strings and you have to get balloons to go into a certain place, or they're fluffy. The idea here is that you can. Is it really cheesing the game to do it the solution you did? Maybe, probably not. Like there was oh god, I just thought of this. Did you ever play The Incredible Machine?
Okay, it's so funny because when you were talking about cutting a string and balloons, I literally thought of Incredible Machine Contraptions, and I was like,
good.
oh wait, we need to talk about that.
I played that when it was on Windows 3.1 for work
Uh-huh.
groups. And The Incredible Machine is a fabulous game. The way it's played is that you have essentially you would call it's like a Rube Goldberg.
It's Rube Goldberg turned into a
game.
video game. Yeah.
You have you basically have like a space that you can just put things in. The things themselves will float if it's like a conveyor belt or a hamster, right? And you have these different things like scissors and stuff, but some things are affected by gravity, like bowling balls and tennis balls and baseballs. And those three things I just named have different characteristics. You have candles, you have fans, you have things where you can like connect gears together or have pulley systems and a rope connecting them. And it's just this absolutely wonderful game that says, put this baseball over the thing into that spot over there.
Yep. And they give you a set of objects that you can use and you can just try to make it work.
Do whatever. It's so good. It's so good. I think the modern incarnation is Contraption Maker.
Yes.
Same
it's slightly less modern, but I can highly recommend Incredible Machines Contraptions. It was more modern. I mean, it probably came out in like 2000 or 2002 or something like that. And I'm guessing you can still get it on Steam. And it has about 1 billion levels. And yeah, I think that's a perfect example of a physics puzzle game because a lot of the objects are physics enabled and there are multiple solutions, but it's still puzzly enough because the levels are handcrafted and there's someone who kind of designed like, ooh, there are like 3 different ways we can envision you could solve this puzzle. But there might be ways to cheese the physics in a few ways where you could solve it in some harebrained way that they didn't even think of. But there's usually multiple solutions that even the designers kind of baked in, at least to the more advanced levels. So yeah, that's a great game.
And you feel good for finding them, by the way. You feel clever.
Yeah.
If you find a cheese solution, you don't feel bad because you circumvented some mechanics. You feel good because it's like, I did the thing.
Exactly. By the way, the original Incredible Machine had a booklet, and to play the game, this was to prevent piracy. This was how they did it back in the day. You guys complain about digital DRM these days, but we've always had DRM, okay? Like back in the day, you had to have the instruction booklet, and it had 3 objects on each page. And when you started up the game, it would say plug in page 27, and you had to like, it was like a code, like a password. You had to be like baseball, basketball, cat. And that was your code to log into the game that time.
I thought that was clever. It wasn't as bad as Leisure Suit Larry, which was like asking you questions to make sure you were of age.
That's funny.
I probably shouldn't talk too much about that, but it's funny. You know, when you're a kid, you're just like, all right.
Yeah.
At any rate.
So physics puzzles, good stuff. And then the next category would be kind of point and click. So things like Machinarium, which is an old one, but it's one of the only ones I've ever played. They're often adventure games. They're usually 2D. They can maybe be 3D with some, like technically Myst was point and click, but it we're calling Mystlike its own genre because it's really a 3D world that you're exploring, even though each image you're seeing is technically a 2D image. It's a 3D world. So this is often more like a 2D world, and they're more story driven. There's often some puzzles of like, oh, I need to go get this piece of pipe. Oh, I can put that pipe back there where there was a pipe missing. It's often kind of just exploration, exploring the world, learning some story, and the puzzles aren't often too advanced. It's kind of just a fun little blip along your journey rather than the point of the game. In all the ones I've played, at least.
Well, there's also games like King's Quest, and I think actually Dave Kvist said Monkey Island. These are also
Monkey
examples. And in fact, I think it was one of these games that from which I got the term moon logic, where it's like, I'm trying to think of a good example. You get like a particular item and you have an inventory, you got a bunch of these things, and you have to actually know to go to a specific spot and use the item in a certain way because you have to like describe it with words sometimes. Because it's this really wacky sort of logic. And, you know, it makes sense once you see it in retrospect, but could you figure it out in the first place? Sometimes that's hard. And that's where we'll talk a little bit about moon logic later. But I think there's a lot of examples in this genre of that sort of thing. But there's also much friendlier ones. I think Machinarium sounds like it's one of the friendlier ones. I have not actually played it, but I do have it.
Yeah, it's Machinarium is a great like relaxation game. You know, it's just like, oh, let's just click. It would be good to play with somebody else because it's like the clicking isn't the game; it's exploring it. So then we've got the next genre is like escape rooms. So The Room is the classic game for that, where it is kind of pointy and clicky, where you're clicking on things, but you're quite literally solving, you know, puzzles to get out of the room.
Yeah.
So that's kind of its own genre. We've got listed there. I haven't played a ton of these. You listed The Room 1 through 4, Old Sins, Escape Room Simulator.
That's right. And a lot of these they're very, very straightforward. They have a lot of overlap. Someone asked if the escape room would be in the Mystlike series, and it actually could be. But these are much more, you have one thing in front of you, and there might be a bunch of different like leads that you have, but once you get through that spot, then it's time to move on to the next room. And there is sort of a sense of linear progression here. Sometimes there's a bit of exploration. I think the Room games had some non-linear exploration parts. But generally speaking, you're in a room, there's some symbols, there's some things to click on, and what sort of experience you have depends on what the maker wanted. They can put in all sorts of different things, or maybe it's a counting puzzle, or maybe it's whatever.
These often The Room feels a little bit like Myst if you removed all the walking and most of the lore and story.
The Room does have some lore to it.
But I said most of the lore. It's got a tiny bit of lore, but it's not a lore game like compared to Myst, or you know, like it's not even close.
Well, once you get to Old Sins, it does become very lore heavy. But it does. The first game is very lore light. I'll say it that way.
Yeah.
But you're right. You're right.
I mean, mostly my point is you don't walk around. Like it's not a walking simulator. Sure, in some ways. Like Riven. By the way, Riven. I do recommend Riven because they just did a remaster recently. It's like where it's actually 3D FPS movement rather than point and click, and that has some pros and cons. The con to that is the old version where you point and click to move had handcrafted views of what you looked at. Yeah. Whereas when you can explore wherever you want to go, certain things are harder to catch and easier to miss. But it also gives some benefits of being able to get new angles on things. So I enjoyed it for the most part, and I would highly recommend Riven to people who are wanting to try a Mystlike.
I do have one complaint about point and click Riven. And there was one puzzle that I was stuck on that we eventually just had to look up. And it was because some random thing in the world, which you had never seen, had like a secret button, had a secret button, and you could see it, but you didn't know the thing was a button, so you never click on it. And it was like 8 pixels by 8 pixels, and it was just so annoying. I'm wondering how they solve that puzzle now that you've mentioned there's a 3D version of Riven. I might have to go look at that.
Yeah, interesting. And then the final category is just puzzle platformers. So again, some more old games here, but Fez, Braid, Limbo, just games that are puzzly games, but they are 2D side scroller, platformers, and they do require being good at controlling the character as part of the game. Someone in the chat is asking about Super Meat Boy. I would say that's a bit not of a puzzle game. I mean, there is a
Not really
half
a
puzzle of having to figure out
never
how to
really
not
have any
die.
question about what to do.
But that's far more about your skill of being able to control Meat Boy than solving the puzzle, I would say.
Don't get me wrong. I love me some Meat Boy. I have 100, not quite 100% of the game. I didn't get the do 20 levels in a run. But like there's not really any figuring out what to do. It's figuring out how to have enough skill to do it.
Right. Often you can easily figure out what you need to do, and it's actually doing it that takes 90% of your time. Jump King, I would argue, is the same thing. Like, it's not really a puzzle. Unless I misunderstand Jump King.
But like, I love Fez. It's very, very exploration heavy. I loved Braid. It made me think about how to approach puzzles differently because of the way the mechanics work in it. Limbo is soaked in atmosphere. Just like Inside, which is another game by the same company, just absolutely saturated with atmosphere. It's so like engrossing. But those puzzles tend to be more linear. There's some exploration, but it's like you have a sequence of things that you interact with. So.
And by the way, I will put in the description on the Krydax Extra YouTube channel and in the description of the podcast, I'll put at least most of the games that we're talking about just listed out in there, so you can go look at them later. So yeah, now I want to move on to talking about a few of the individual games that are maybe some of, in our opinions, the best ones on this list, and we want to dive a little deeper, or maybe our favorite ones. Best is a bit too subjective, but some of our favorite ones. And then we'll talk a little bit about, probably within those conversations, we can fit in some chatting about the mechanics of puzzle games within that. So the first one I want to talk about is one of my all-time favorites, which I never quite beat. I got so far, I need to revisit it at some point. It's Baba Is You.
That game is so fascinating. I didn't beat it either. I actually started running into puzzles I couldn't solve.
Oh, yeah.
That's not common for me. I can usually crack my head against a wall. I'll bust through brick walls with my forehead, and I was like, oh.
It is a rough time for your brain, but it's a great. Baba Is You breaks your brain over and over and over again. You thought your brain had been broken? No, it hadn't been, because then you do the next level and it breaks it in a new way that you didn't know was possible. So to describe the game in as few words as possible, which is always hard for me, it's a game where you create the rules by moving rules around in the game world. So there are things like, so Baba Is You are 3 different words. So Baba is like the name of your character, is like an equal sign almost in the game, and then you. And if the word Baba is next to the word is, which is next to the word you, then that means you will control the Baba character, like the Baba sprite in the game world. And this is slightly spoilery. I'm spoiling the first chapter of the game by telling you this, but I think that's fine.
There's so much to the game.
There's so much to the game. This is you'll discover all this in the first hour of playing. And then you could change it. If the word rock was in the game world, this is top down, by the way, 2D top down, you could push the word rock to take the place of Baba, and then it would say rock is you, and now you would be controlling the rock that's in the game world instead of the Baba character. And so you literally are learning the rules as you go, and you can change the rules as you go, and they're introducing new types of rules as you go, and you're having to figure out how can and there are some characters that move on their own, and that you can get them to move into a spot where they would push a rule out of the way, so the rule would stop being true, so maybe a wall would no longer get in your way. Like, it's crazy how many possibilities there are. And there's
okay, sorry, let me finish that.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and there's tons of content to it. So like, if you're into like these kind of like solve a puzzle and then get another one that will break my brain in a new way, like Baba Is You is so worth the money. And then that's not even getting into all of the user made levels. Their entire, there's probably 10 times as much user made content as original game content, and probably 10% of it is just as good. So I mean, there's tons of stuff there. So I cannot recommend the game highly enough.
Yeah, the way I sort of describe it to people, it's imagine that all of the game objects in the game had default properties, but then you manipulated what properties these things had, and the way you did so was by push block logic.
Yeah.
That's Baba is you. And I don't want to go too much more detail on it because there is so much to discover. You've actually covered a few of them, but there is so many there's different properties, there's different things. They have different properties to begin with, and you can change them in different ways, and it really makes you recontextualize what your understanding of this world is several times in a row.
Yeah.
So it's a brilliant game. Cannot recommend it highly enough. It's not that expensive, but like my kids liked it, and then we all got stuck. How did you
Yep.
get my entire family stuck on
Yeah.
a puzzle? Like
I
what,
would
dude?
say there are a couple, and this is more a praise of the game than a knock on it, because a lot of games there are sometimes in puzzle games, this is actually kind of a mechanic of puzzle games we need to talk about, is like, are they fair? Some puzzles feel unfair. Like you were mentioning in Riven, there was one button that was like really impossible to find, and it's like you just had to almost get lucky and just click on everything to find it. And that doesn't feel like you got rewarded for being smart. That feels like you got rewarded for having an accident. And that doesn't feel good. That's not a feel good in a puzzle game. And so something puzzle creators are having to do when they make games is figure out what feels like fair to figure out and what feels unfair to figure out. And Baba Is You is almost always fair. In my I played through all but the last world or two, and I beat every level on the way there. I did look up some hints on the way. I will freely admit that. But there were only like 2 levels in that entire experience where I felt like that was unfair. I think it was only 2. I remember one of them specifically where I was like, oh, that there was one particular level that when I did look up a hint for it and I was like, wait, that's the solution. Like I was pretty frustrated, but that was only one level. And there was one more that I think I was like, I don't know about that one. And then the rest of them were like, oh yeah, like that is a good application of logic. And like, I couldn't get there on my own, but I feel like that is a fair solve. And so it's a really rigorous game in that sense.
From a game designer's perspective, that's actually a huge deal, and this is what makes making puzzle games so difficult, because you have to give the player the feeling that when they solve it, they are smart, and the path they took to get there made sense. There was an internal logic that you may have set up in your game world, where maybe there's portals or time travel or whatever your gimmick is, but that they could understand the rules of and engage with. And there are times when you want your player to explore and find something. Maybe that might be physically moving around the game space and finding some element that would give them a clue to solve a puzzle. Sometimes it's you hand them, like in The Witness, you hand them an actual puzzle, don't tell them any of the rules, and let them sort of work out what the rules are as they just tinker with elements and explore, in a sense, the concept space. And I think the really big challenge here is staying away from, again, I'm going to say moon logic. This is to say when it's a solution to a puzzle where it makes total sense in retrospect, but there was no forward method of getting there. Like you can look back and see what it was, but you couldn't look forward and predict your way there. And that can happen because maybe there's too many branching paths, and then you're just picking one sort of arbitrarily. Or it might be that the clues were too vague, or it might be that the actual method for finding out whether or not something is a solution, like testing your hypotheses, is way too involved. Maybe it's tedious. Maybe it's like in Doom where you finish a level. It looks like wall humping when you go and try to use every single wall and you try to find the one that opens up and gives you the candy. So these are things to be very, very careful with as you try to design these games. But if you get it right, then you can get a very, very powerful experience. You get your goal here in this sense is to give the player the feeling that they are smart, capable, that they understand the world, that they've grown, because that is partially what gives them that sense of accomplishment, worthwhile feeling of I did the thing and that thing was worth doing. So yeah, that's going to be a reoccurring theme as I sort of talk about all the rest of the games on this list. But that is something that it's not easy. Like we can sit here as gamers in judgment and say, that puzzle was dumb. But when you're the designer, you have this very weird perspective where you know all the pieces. There goes my camera. You know all the pieces, and it's very difficult to get out of that perspective and see the game from what it is to be a player that does not have any of that information, that does not have any of the 50,000-foot views.
Yep.
So, yeah.
It's why extensive, just on the designing note, and I have not designed my own puzzle game. I have designed a few variant Sudokus, but I've seen enough chat about designing puzzle games that I know that extensive playtesting is necessary for that exact reason. Yes. You need people who have never seen your game. You didn't talk to them during development or anything. They're just going in with a fresh pair of eyes and a fresh brain. And how do they experience it? And you need lots of those people, not just two of your friends who think similarly to you because you're friends and talk about programming. You need people who've never programmed before. You need people who are, from different walks of life. Like, you need lots of different people to play your game and give you feedback, because there will be lots of that moon logic if you're not. Like, I think if you were to, it's almost impossible to avoid. If you're to make your own puzzle game, you're going to have moon logic in there, as you're calling it. And by the way, I had to Google moon logic. Apparently it comes from the word lunacy, like lunar, like it's crazy.
Oh, is that what it is? Okay.
So yeah, it's like something like that. But yeah, it's just logic that doesn't really make sense to expect someone to be able to follow that path. You're going to have that in your game if you're the only pair of eyes and the only brain that's ever looked at it. Because everything that you think makes sense to you, but you're so different than everybody else. So to find something that hits the common denominator of what most people can accomplish is really hard. And you need a lot of playtesters for that. I don't think there's a way to get around it other than a lot of playtesters. Or it's just too easy. Or it has too many solutions. Like, those are some other ways to get around it, but those aren't fun. So you need playtesters to get the best of both worlds. Anyway.
Nope, that's true.
So yeah, Bombe is you. Super high recommend. If I were to recommend one game off this list to the average listener to this podcast, it actually would be Bombe is you. Weirdly enough, there are the next one I'm going to talk about just for a minute. I would also highly recommend it, but I'd actually recommend Bombe is you more because I think I got more total enjoyment out of it. But the next game is experiential, which is Outer Wilds. And like I said, I don't want to spoil much about this game, but Outer Wilds is one of those games that you would pay money to forget, like good money. I would pay more than I paid for Outer Wilds to play it again. Like, I'd pay more for the second playthrough if I would forget everything about the first playthrough. That's how good it is to experience as a new thing.
I've seen that movie. It seems like that doesn't usually end well.
Yeah, exactly.
Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Sorry.
Yeah, but all that to be said, Outer Wilds, if you've heard about it and you've thought maybe I would enjoy that, then go play it. It is worth it. It is a unique experience, and as much as I want to talk about the mechanics of it, even talking about the mechanics of it is spoiling a little bit of it, so I don't even want to get that far into it. But it has some really cool mechanics that really start to twist your brain. And I will say, I think I can share this without it being too spoilery. It is heavy on the lore and a bit lighter on the like crunchy puzzles. It's not like a crunchy hard logic puzzle game. So it is very lore driven. And so more like the Mystlikes, where like if that's not your vibe, if you don't really care about lore at all and you never enjoyed Myst or anything like that, Outer Wilds might not be your game. It might still be your game because it's not the same as those, but it is a very lore heavy game and you're kind of discovering the world as you go. And so if that part is like very much not your style, then it might not be the game for you. But between Bombe and you and Outer Wilds, you're going to love, almost every human on the planet is going to enjoy one of those two games because I feel like that's
a very wide net there.
Yeah,
they're very different.
Yeah, they're very different, but I love both of them. I think a lot of people love both, but
Bombe Is has like zero lore, I think.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like literally by deliberate intent.
So why don't you talk a little bit about Blueprints? That's what I want to talk about next.
So I've been absolutely obsessed with this game, and this is something that I haven't done for a long time. Like, I'll occasionally play a game for pleasure. I mean, very occasionally. Like, I think I played a little bit of Vintage Story. High quality game, very good. Would recommend. It's kind of like a Minecraft-like game, but with a lot more in the way of making very, very minute steps of progress, that kind of thing. But even then, like it's hard for me to play a game for pleasure these days. Partially it's because, well, I'm a dad and I've got kids and a wife and a house and all that stuff. But the problem is, it's like I just don't have any time. How do you find time? But I'm also a streamer slash game dev, so occasionally I will find a game where it's just like, wow, this game just, I need to play it. And Blueprints has sort of filled that role for the past few weeks. I think this is week 4 of playing it, actually. And the thing is that it is like a board game, and Myst had a love child. Like I, the way I don't want to go into too much spoiler detail here, because as I would suggest to everybody who's even thinking about playing it, go into it blind. Very similar to the advice you just given for the Outer Wilds. But to sort of give you some sense of it, there are puzzles that will require you to take notes. Unless, of course, you just have an eidetic memory. But even then, I think there is a lot of information coming at you in this game. I will say that it is a game that I have been using. I will give you a piece of software called PureRef. If you want to play this game, PureRef is free, very good for taking notes. Another good option is Obsidian, also free, very good for taking notes. There's no right answer. Whatever.
Another good option, the way that I did it, is I would use Google Sheets, and I would paste my pictures into it with a note with text, and then I could Control F the text, be like, oh, I want to look at my notes about this room, and I could then search up that room, and it would take me to all the pictures of that room.
Yeah.
So that's
I have
how I did it.
I have something I don't want to share it on stream because it's basically just a wall of spoilers. But basically, I have a PureRef, which is like this wildly huge art canvas, if you will, but it's just filled with all these screenshots.
It's like the meme of the Always Sunny in Philadelphia guy with Pepe Silvia, where he's like got the crazy look in his eyes, and there's all the strings going with all the pictures.
It's like literally that. At one point, I had figured out that you can actually make those little strings, and so I did. But okay, so it's probably a little bit like that.
There is no Pepe Silvia. Anyway, I mean, the game makes you feel that way too. Like there are so many connections between so many things. And the part, as Galdoc was saying, it's like a board game and a Mystlike had a baby. Like the board game part is really fun too. So anyone who's played board games, and this isn't really spoilery because you'll encounter this within minutes of playing the game. But when you draft from a pile of rooms, so it's like a game where you start at the starting room and you pull a tile out of a bag. You pull 3 tiles and you get to pick which one you connect, and then you can connect that tile. But that tile is actually the room that you then can walk into. And so that's kind of, I won't say more than that, but that's kind of the vibe of the game. And you're building out your map as you go. And then you get to do it, and then it resets. Like it's not like that's called one day, and the whole game is like a lot of days. And so it's got a good cyclical feel to it. Most Mystlikes aren't like that. It's kind of just one long journey in most Mystlikes, but this has these kind of inflection points of did you finish that day, and that makes for a really addicting game because it's kind of that like Civilization one more turn vibe where you're just like, oh, one more day. Like I learned all these things in this day, and now I have all these new things I want to try for this next day. And so it really, I think that's part of why the game is so addicting as a puzzle lore game. Normally those games don't feel quite as addicting as this, and I think it's because of the day mechanic having this like secondary measurement of time that isn't just regular minutes.
Yeah. And there is one thing I want to point out for anyone thinking about playing the game. This is not a spoiler. I am simply telling you that there is a lot of depth to the story. When you play the game, it doesn't seem like there will be, because I've played lots of games where there's like some sort of context for the game to exist in, and you play the game in that context, and it was this incredibly contrived world, and fine, I get it. That is a thing. In this case, there is a feeling of it is contrived. I mean, there are many jokes that we can make about how the world actually works, but what I will add is that as you play the game, there is a ton of lore. There is not just a ton of lore, but that lore actually, it simultaneously storytells and gives you information for the puzzles you're trying to solve. I'm not going to say too much more than that, but it just keeps going.
Yeah, however big you think the game is, it's bigger than that. Like it is a massively large game. So if you're worried about like the amount of content that you're getting from a puzzle game, if you want the most bang for your buck, Blueprints is the game to buy compared to all the other ones we've talked about. That or maybe Baba Is You. I think those are both insane bang for your buck in terms of like how many hours of gameplay will you get if you want to keep playing the game. Blueprints is huge. Baba Is You is huge. A lot of the other games like Myst or Outer Wilds, they are kind of like a fixed playtime. That's great, but once you've beaten it, it's most of the time you're not just going to go back and play it again for like quite a few years.
Yeah, I don't know if I could ever play Myst again. I just don't know if I could.
Yeah.
I mean, I could play noodle around in it, maybe play like a new version where you can walk around. But once you've solved the puzzles, it's the same puzzles over and over again. And to a certain extent, it's the same way with Blueprints in that there is like a thing to do for some of these things, but there's so many different ways of going about it. And actually, Dave Kvist brings up a good point. It's that when you go to play a day, as you've mentioned, there's like a bunch of different goals that you can do. And part of the skill of the game is not just solving the puzzles or just playing the board game, but rather it's figuring out what is it that you're going to do? What's your goal?
Yeah, like what door can I knock on next?
Yes, that will advance the goal. Because what's going to end up happening is you're going to be playing the thing. You'll have like 15 things you can do. And then after a couple of drafts, well, that might dwindle down to 5. But if you don't realize that it dwindled down to 5 because you don't know well enough about it, how the game works, then you might still try to pursue goals that are probably not going to work anymore. But if you're skilled, then you will try to pursue the goals that you still can. And at a certain point, you'll just be achieving goals. It's very, very well done in that respect.
And so that, again, with Factorio overlap, like that's what Factorio is, right? Like with Factorio, you're like, oh, I need more iron plates. I need to fix my trains because I'm low on train supply and I don't have enough of green science. And you're like, which door am I going to go in next? And I could do all of them. And in Factorio, you can kind of only do one thing at a time because you're just a player with one agency. But in Blueprints, it's kind of similar where you're like, oh, there's like 5 different avenues that I really want to figure out all of them. But given the rooms that I was able to pick on this run, which ones can I focus more towards? And you kind of have to be a little flexible with that, with the randomness, which is fun too.
Yeah, and there is, I'm not, again, no spoilers, so I won't give any context for this, but there was one day that I played that I had a pretty specific goal that I wanted to do. But there were a bunch of things still left to do. And as I played that day, what ended up happening was that the opposite of a dwindle down happened. An expansion out happened. And I ended up doing like 8 goals or whatever. And some of them were pretty major goals, all in the same day. It's a really cool feeling.
Yeah, sometimes you go in looking for answers and instead you find more questions.
Yeah, but like
you found answers and questions at the same time. Yeah, it's great. It's a great game.
Sorry, I'll keep going on and on about it. But there haven't been many Moon Logic puzzles. Feel like there's been 1 or 2, but I can't.
Yeah, I had a few. I had a couple frustrating moments, but it's very it's the exception, not the rule, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure. Yeah, Blueprints, highly recommend. I mean, it's one of those games where it's like it would be hard to not enjoy this. It's also a great game to play with your significant other or a friend that also hasn't experienced it, because it is a game where like really having someone else's brain is a really huge gain. Like the controls of the game are very simple. It's not hard, it is just walking around and clicking on things. So it's far more about the thinking and choosing and what do you do next that makes the game. And therefore having an audience, it's a great game for streaming for that reason. Like it's such a cool game. We got to move on though, or this podcast will be 2 hours long and I don't have 2 hours. So Blueprints, highly recommend. A few other ones. We already talked about Antichamber a little bit, so we don't need to go too much further into that. But that's another one that like is just a fun brain breaking game. That one's back more towards the Portal direction. And Lingo, I think, also goes with the Antichamber category. So Lingo and Antichamber are both really fun, kind of brain-breaking, like you're learning some of the rules as you go, and it doesn't make sense, but it sort of starts to make sense, and just really cool. Lingo was really unique. I would recommend look at it on Steam. and don't read a ton of reviews, but just look at enough of the things to see if it looks interesting, because it's a word game, but it's not. It's also a puzzle game. It's hard to
Similar to
even
games you've
describe it.
played, Blueprints and The Witness. Like literally, that's what Steam is telling me
Yeah,
about Lingo right
yeah,
now.
yep. And Lingo 2 is also out, and it's really
Oh,
good according to
I didn't realize
reviews
they were
and
making it.
people in Twitch chat right now. I haven't played Lingo 2 yet, but can recommend that one too, probably just on name alone. Um, and then, do we want to talk for a minute just about the Myst kind of world and like go into those a little bit, or?
Sure. I mean, so like this is something that I've never actually shared because I didn't even think it was going to be a thing. But like I've read the books. They're Myst
Yeah,
books. They actually
there are
wrote
Myst
3
books.
novels. I actually really enjoyed the first one. Second one, it was okay, and the third one was kind of like, huh, that happened. But like it wasn't bad. I was more reading it because whatever. But like it fills in some of the lore that Myst is a game where there is a world of backstory that happened, and you will learn some about it as you play the game. But there's always going to be that invisible layer of consistency that ties everything together. Um, so it's very good in that respect. But as far as like it literally created its own genre, Mystlike, if you will. But it drew elements from a lot of other puzzle games. It's just that it did it really, really well. Um, Riven was also really good. I remember when I was a young man, I don't know if I beat it or not. I think there were some things that I couldn't figure out, and I did just look them up because I was like a teenager at the time. I mean, heck, it came out in the 90s, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so like I just played it and whatever. I didn't think much of it. But then later in life, my wife and I sat down and did it, and we actually solved Riven, no hints at all. I'd forgotten everything from my teen years. But it was really, really interesting because there is, as you play Riven, this sense of gathering clues that isn't. It's hard to reproduce. I mean, Blueprints has this. Blueprints achieves it through sort of the board game aspect that we've mentioned several times. But like Riven isn't a board game. It's very, very, here's the world. We set it up. It's in motion. You're going to have to go look around. Um, and in that respect, I would say it's very, like, I would very highly recommend it. I'm trying to remember what Myst's major puzzles feel like. There was one puzzle that I remember that I'm not going to spoil, but that wasn't like that I don't know that I would have ever figured it out. It was one of those. Calling it moon logic might be doing it a disservice, but it was from my perspective a little close to it.
Yeah,
But it was so good.
I would say Myst and Riven had a bit more moon logic than the more modern games like Blueprints and Outer Wilds, that because I think these newer games have had years of those games to build on and learn what not to
Yeah.
do, and have more playtesters are available in this digital age and stuff. So I think the older games do have a little bit of a struggle from like they were in the early years of puzzling video games. And I think there are just some things that they couldn't build on, but had to build first. And so there were
Yeah.
some mistakes made in that process. And I think Myst and Riven, like if I were just to recommend someone who's, they're 20 years old, they want to get into a puzzle game, I don't think Myst and Riven would be the first things on my list. I think it would be these other games like Baba Is You or Blueprints or Outer Wilds or even some other depending on the category, but I would still highly recommend those games to people who are into the genre.
Yeah, like people are mentioning in the chat right now some of the sequels to Myst. Myst 3 was good, but the puzzles were a lot simpler. Like they tamped down the difficulty a fair amount, which is actually not the worst because Riven was pretty hard. But
Speaking of
like,
Riven, I do want to, before I forget, I did play Riven on stream on YouTube. So if you're
okay.
interested in a playthrough of Krydax playing Riven, y'all can go check out my YouTube live section and search for Riven. I played through the new edition that just came out like last year. So it's quite recent.
Yeah, and there was something called Myst Uru,
Mm-hmm.
which was like supposed to be a multiplayer version thing. I don't know exactly what happened with it. But it was not it again had very good atmosphere, but the puzzles were essentially just find the thing. It wasn't even solve the puzzles, find the thing. And to a certain extent, sure, I get it. There were puzzles that you were solving to access more places, but then it just turned into find the thing. And I was kind of like, oh, okay. But as you said a moment ago, it's because these were, in a sense, pioneering games where they were learning what people would do. And it sort of gave me the notion, and this is said a little bit tongue in cheek, that learning the counting symbols for a puzzle game is kind of like the double jump so of a Mystlike. So the where this comment comes from is that in most platforming games where there's a Metroidvania element, you either will find at some point a double jump or you'll start with one. It's a very fun mechanic. But like you'll almost always get one if you don't have one at the beginning of the game. And when you do, it divides the game in two. And it's very neat that division. It's before the double jump and after. They feel they're the same game. There's the same DNA, obviously, but the experience just feels very different. And it's very common. Like it's in so many games. I'm trying to think, Symphony of the Night, which is one of the games where the Metroidvania, that's put the Vania in there, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. But like Ori and the Blind Forest, every time there's a game like this, there's a double jump, and you kind of can measure the game based on where its double jump is.
Yeah, or bombs before and after you have bombs, to blow a hole in cracked walls. Like it's a cliche.
Yeah, and finding the counting symbols was a puzzle in many of the Myst games, like figuring out what symbol meant what number.
Yeah, what means one, what means two.
Sure. And there were other games like I think it's Eyes of Ara, and then there's Quern, and they also have they're also Myst-like games. They're very good. We enjoyed them, but like they're also at some point you're going to be finding the counting system.
Yeah, and those are known as knowledge checkpoints in the Mario Maker community. And Mario, by the way, puzzle games. There are lots of puzzle. Carl Sagan 42 has done a lot of Mario Maker stuff over the years, and he's done a lot of what are called one-screen puzzles. And it's basically putting together Mario elements, but in a way that turns the game into a puzzle, kind of like Portal or something. And there are these things called knowledge checkpoints, which, because the game Mario only allows 2 checkpoints, where like if you die, you respawn at the checkpoint. But a knowledge checkpoint is when you learn that, if I stand on this block for exactly 10 seconds and then jump, then I can go into this pipe. And you would never do that on accident. So it's kind of a moon logic solution, but basically the game will reveal to you that that's what you need to do after you pass the second checkpoint. So then it's kind of like a secret third checkpoint that now that you know this thing, you can shortcut to do this. And now it's kind of like you're now at the third checkpoint. And that idea of a knowledge checkpoint is used in a lot of the games we've talked about today. It's used in the Mystlikes. It's used in Blueprints. It may or may not show up in Outer Wilds somewhere. But just this idea that you've learned something and now you can take a different path through the game. And that's why these games are so often things that are hard to replay. It kills the replay value when you already have the knowledge checkpoint. And that's why people tell you to go into these games blind, is because once you've seen some of these things, you cannot unsee them, and you would never be able to experience them for the first time. So highly recommend, Myst and Riven, and sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. I do recommend those games, but the idea that you're like learning the lore, and the lore is part of the knowledge checkpoint to help you solve the puzzles, is a really satisfying element of those games.
And I also want to just mention, like, there are times when in some of these games you could be rewarded by literally going to every single screen and clicking on every single thing, and then if you wanted to really do it, you get all the items, and with them in your inventory, go to every single pixel, and this gets to the tedium sort of problem. And the idea is that these knowledge checkpoints are hidden in that space, in the sense that if you did this thing, yeah, sure, you'd find it, but it sucks, and you would never want to do it that way. Even when Carl Sagan is playing like a Sean Hip level, I think recently he did one that was like called Pushing Daisies by Sean Hip, which is a reimagining of one of his previous ones from Mario Maker 1. There were like some subtle mechanics that you can do, and he's not just gonna like throw everything at the wall and brute force it. Someone mentioned earlier that that's what that's called. Yep, it's called brute forcing. He's not gonna do that. He's gonna literally try to play the game, and when he figures out that he can do it, it's just so much better. It's just so good. I wish it didn't kill. I don't know how to make a puzzle game where that isn't the case. That doesn't end up feeling something like a Sudoku, where you can just like um have a random generator of these things. But you know, it's something that I think is worth it, because if you're playing these games for the first time on your own, you do get those dopamine hits. You do get that feeling of, oh, I figured it out.
Yep.
So
And that's part of why it's nice that we have this beautiful podcast episode for you listeners, because now you have a huge list of puzzle games. And when you've beaten one and its replay value is gone, you go play another one, because these are all great. One game I want to talk about is Bombe. I mentioned that one earlier. And it's a pretty unique game that I think probably doesn't have the limelight that it deserves. It fits probably the closest into the Zachtronics like games, but I wouldn't say it fits solidly in that category. Essentially, it's Minesweeper, but you create rules which get automatically applied to cells. So, for example, in classic grid, square grid Minesweeper, if you click on a button and you see an 8, that means all 8 of the cells around it are bombs, right? So you can create a rule that would basically say if it sees an 8, it marks the 8 cells around it as a bomb. And then now, if you start a level, that rule will get automatically applied. And then if you see a rule that has a 0, it could reveal all the tiles around it. And you can start applying all these rules together, and the game will apply them automatically. And now all of a sudden you've built a set of rules that solves 99 puzzles in a row out of a set of 100. But then there's one puzzle it didn't solve. So you're like, what rule do I need to add to finish this puzzle? And now you can solve a whole set automatically. Well, now you go to the next set, which might have, a slightly different situation. And it's hard to describe. If you go look at the store, the Steam store page, it will help you understand it a little bit better. But there's a lot of axes on which the game grows. At one point, they give you access to variables, which lets you make rules in different ways that are more efficient and apply to more situations. There's new game mechanics in terms of, rather than a cell telling you that there's 4 bombs around it, it might say 4 plus, which means there's 4 or more bombs around it. You don't know. Is it 4? Is it 5? What rules can you apply to that? And then there's new shapes of cells. You start out with hex, and then it goes to grid, and then it goes to triangular, and then it goes to like these weird infinite tilings, which are confusing. So there's lots of cool axes, and the game gives you a lot of tools to help, sort things and figure out your own rules. And it's hard to describe super well, but if you go look at just a little bit of gameplay or look at the pictures on the Steam page, you'll start to understand it a little bit. And the game is only, at least in the US, it's on sale right now. Actually, it's only $7. So it's not very expensive, and I got 20 hours of fun out of it, and I didn't even get close to beating it. There's a lot more there to it. So I can highly recommend Bombe.
it is the, as you have said, bomb.
It is the Bombe.
Yeah, that's actually, you are right. It is on sale for 30% off. Cool. Yeah, these sorts of games I've always found interesting. And when I did grad school, I was doing a class with a professor that had me using, can't remember the name of the language, but it was a declarative language. And I think I'm using that word wrong, but like essentially the idea was that what you do in order to program something is you state the rules of the thing that's happening. And in doing so, you can write 3 lines of quote unquote code to capture the idea of a single Sudoku. And 2 of those lines are the rules of Sudoku. And the third one is what numbers are where. And it's like, wait, what now? So it's not quite the exact same thing as what you're describing here, because this is, they're capturing specific things and they're trying to, present a game to you that has progression and stuff. But it's the same kind of idea that you're essentially making a solver of these things rather than doing it yourself, because that in and of itself is an act of creation that can be fun.
Yeah. Also, I will say the game does a good job with their visuals and audio. Like, it's a really rewarding, as your auto solver is going through the levels and solving them, you can like speed it up, and it makes satisfying sound effects. And so when you finally feel like you've gotten all your rules figured out, you crank it up to max speed, and it's just making all these sounds, and you're like, oh yeah, like it gives you that dopamine hit of like, I figured it out. I've solved all these puzzles. It's a really fun feeling.
Yeah. And there was one thing that someone mentioned that Supraland, which is kind of its own sort of category. I did play Supraland, and that one I did 100%. It's kind of like it's an open world game. It has some Metroidvania elements to it, but what you find as you explore these areas are puzzles in a sense. So it's kind of like just how Blueprints is a board game plus a Mystlike kind of game. This is more of an FPS Metroidvania meets a puzzle game. So yeah, there's definitely some other categories here too that we might not have hit, but that's just because people are very creative and keep making cool things.
That's true. So many things. So yeah, I mean, are there any other games you wanted to dive into a little bit? We talked about a lot.
Well, and to a certain extent, many of these we've talked about a lot of the exemplary games in these sort of these scenarios. Someone mentioned the idea that it's hard to make a random generator to make something that is super fun, and I do understand because like there is the Sudoku. Part of the issue that I have with these random number generators, and I'm actually really curious how this will resonate both with you and with the listeners, is I feel like when I solve a randomly generated puzzle, it's a little less satisfying than when I solve one that's handcrafted. And it was hard for me to figure out why. But like there was we obviously have been throwing around the term roguelike and roguelite, right? You mentioned earlier that the board game element of Blueprints has a roguelike element. And that's true. It does. Like you get a randomly generated world each time, so to speak, like a board game, right? You're drawing rooms, etc. But like that one feels fine, whereas there are other ones that didn't necessarily feel so fun. And I think it has to do, like, and this is just my hypothesis, the fact that in a sense, I'm doing something that had more meaning behind it when I solve a puzzle that was handcrafted by somebody. When someone said, this is an experience that I think you might enjoy, it might not be them literally, like, I don't know the maker personally of any of these games. Like, I've never met them. But in a sense, there is a communication vector there where they have made this thing that they have said, it's worth, give me some dollars and I will give you this experience. And that sort of props up the idea that there is a meaning behind having done this thing that adds to the sense of accomplishment. It adds to the sense of pleasure for having done it. And to a certain extent can be absent in a game where it's like, we just made a Sudoku generator. Now go solve a whole bunch of them. It feels like you can't make any progress because there's an infinite number of these things. And it doesn't feel as cohesive. And it doesn't feel like there's a meaning behind a sort of human relation experience here. I don't know if that's a perspective that anyone else shares, though. I don't know if other people say, there's like
I think a lot of people do.
Here.
I think this even connects, and I don't want to go too deep into talking about AI art because that is a very hot topic these days. So, but I will say that I think most people agree there is a certain charm. I think charm is the word that I kept thinking of as you were talking. There's a charm to human designed things that is absent with randomly generated things. And AI art, even though it's not randomly generated, in some ways it is. And when you look at AI art, it doesn't have that charm. Even if it's bad art that someone would have made instead, it has the charm that someone whipped out MS Paint and made some lines, and a human took time to make that thing. And the fact that someone took time to make something adds some sort of intangible value, even if it's a bad thing. Even if someone made a Minecraft map, a custom world, and it was bad, it still would have a charm to it because someone made that. Someone spent their human time making it. And I think when it comes to puzzle levels, it's a similar idea where if you play a puzzle on Cracking the Cryptic, a human designed it. Even if it wasn't your favorite puzzle, there's some charm to knowing someone took some minutes to hours of their life to lay these elements out for me, and I get to experience what they laid out. And that's so different than a randomly generated puzzle where you're really just wanting to get fed puzzle numbers from a randomly generated sense, which is different than I want to experience something that someone created. And what's weird, though, is sometimes the randomly generated stuff could have enough guidelines to it that it might be a more fun puzzle than a bad puzzle someone made themselves, but it's still lacking that charm. And so there's a really interesting world there of like with puzzle games, and most of the puzzle games we've talked about have no random generation. I'm guessing Bombe, it kind of doesn't matter if some of the puzzles are randomly generated, because even those are following very specific rules, and the game is all about making rules to solve the rules. So that one's not about handcrafted puzzles, it's about handcrafted progression steps, which are there. So yeah, I think there's just the value of the human element that is really intangible. And I think as sciencey people, I see a lot of conversations that try to minimize the human element because it can't be easily measured and it can't be easily quantified. But that does not minimize the value of it. There is a value to our human selves that comes from humans making things that I don't think anyone can really put numbers on.
Yeah, we are social creatures, and to a certain extent, much of the meaning that we apply to the world around us and how we perceive it comes from the interactions that we have with each other, because that's how we grew up. We are in a very strong way a product of the experiences we've had. Some of the people in chat are mentioning various. I can't speak too much on some of those, but there was a point that I would bring up to think about, and that is in a game called what is it called? Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup. Sorry, I said that wrong. Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup is a breathtakingly accurately tuned roguelite. Not light. There is no meta progression in the entire game. You are essentially thrown into a dungeon, and you either read the rules and do the things, or you dead. You do level up in the sense that you can get to level 27, your character, but when you die, you dead, there's no option of continue. There never will be. And the reason is that the thing that levels up as you play this game is you. You, the player, level up. And the thing that's leveling up is your actual understanding of the world, the game mechanics, and how to actually get consistently a good outcome, even when the game gives you a just weird, unfortunate, spread of circumstance, whatever it happens to be, right? And so for me, that one doesn't necessarily. So for me, that one, I can extract more meaning and value from having done it, from the fact that I'm growing as the player, learning how to engage with this world.
Right.
So there's still,
and that's the draw of most roguelikes, I think. Like there are, and I don't want people to hear what I was talking about as saying procedural generation is bad, or randomly generated games are bad, or even random Sudokus are bad. They're not, but they are lacking. Yeah. There are elements of those games, depending on how much of the game is random, like in the Sudoku sense, the whole thing is random. And when the entire thing that's generated is random, that's different than a procedurally generated game where 99% of the game is handcrafted, but the way the ore is distributed around the map is random. Like that's different, sure. Right? Yeah, and so all I'm saying is that when it's lacking the human element, that does change something. It's not inherently all bad, though, that there are some random elements. Sometimes that adds to the fun. A game can be more fun with random machine generated stuff in there. And if that's balanced well with the humanly chosen elements, it can make a really perfect experience.
Yeah, I'm thinking of The Witness, that has a moment in the game where I think there are some randomly generated puzzles, but they're not like the rules. You learn them as the player, and then you just have to engage with them. But there are some randomly generated elements there. But that's also a very it's one piece of the entire experience. So I think that's kind of what you're getting. It's
one place where it failed was Starfield. Starfield used these. That. What?
I still have not played that. That's
that's fine. It's the Skyrim in space.
Skyrim in space?
Yeah, Skyrim in space. And they screwed up because the funnest part of Skyrim was being at point A, and you have a quest that needs you to go to point B, and you walk towards point B, and on your way you find a million things to do. Because it's a handcrafted world. Well, guess what you do in Skyrim? You go to your fast travel ship and you fast travel to planet, which has point B. And then point B is out in the middle of the wilderness. And there's nothing between you and point B other than empty space. And there are these there's handcrafted clumps that then get procedurally placed. But the world is not handcrafted. So it's just so boring and empty. And I was... Starfield was a huge loss, in my opinion, because the procedurally generated world was the exact opposite of what I wanted. I would have rather had like 5 planets only. I don't need 10 million planets. Give me 5, where every bit that I can explore on those 5 planets has been placed by the human, and every little nook and cranny and every doorway is meant to be there. And I think that really would have made the game so much better. So I think that's an example of how the human touch is really important. And at least for me, it completely ruined a game because it didn't have enough of it.
Yeah, and it's to a certain extent all in service of propping up the notion that by playing this game, you're doing something that's fun, rewarding, or in some way gives you some positive feel. And this sense of connection is a huge way that this can happen. Absent it, you can still get stuff. When I played Sudoku and I eventually learned many of the strategies that I would then, if I had to keep playing it, I could keep doing. It was fun while I was learning them, and then it kind of fell off, right? I think a lot of people had that experience with Sudoku. You do like a bunch of them, and eventually you figure out kind of what the strats are, and you're like, all right, I kind of extracted what I can from this experience. But I think that especially in a game like Starfield, I'm a little sad to hear that. I liked Skyrim, but there were times when I felt like I could see the underlying structure, and that's when I sort of got checked out. Like, I go into this one thing where it's like, "Oh, adventurer, can you go slay the thing?" And he doesn't verbalize what's happening because it's randomly generated. And the thing is, there's a bear in a house, and go to house and make bear stop being house. And it's like, okay, at that point, I'm like, I don't like that. But then this other thing where it's like, okay, you need to go to the thieving guild and meet this person. Now we're on.
Right.
Forget about all the filler content. Like, I don't need any of that. What I need to feel like I'm accomplishing something. So I don't know. I think that going through some of these games and adding them in, you can sort of pad the runtime. But at a certain point, when it's from the way you've described it just now, it sounds like there's way too much padding and way too little. Like the I guess the way of thinking about this, and I apologize that I'm not coming to you now with finished thoughts, but things I'm kind of coming up with on the fly, is that there's a sort of procedurally generated content to handmade content ratio. And
Right.
that ratio is engendered by how you actually encounter it, not necessarily by what's designed. Like, it could be they've designed all this handmade content, but they've spread it out through a universe that's just way too light and fluffy with procedurally generated
Yeah,
content.
mile wide, inch deep is another term that people
Yeah.
use for some design elements, even not procedural, but like maybe you just have too many mechanics in your game and they're all handcrafted. But if nothing gives you the depth that you seek in a game, and so it's a mixture of like too light and fluffy and airy with the procedural parts being not necessarily exactly what you want in the first place. There are some games where the procedural parts might be a big part of the game, like Minecraft's world generation, but
Mhm.
you're meant to engage in and around that world with all the handcrafted mechanics of like, well, what does iron produce? Iron, that's a handcrafted designed thing. And there's always a certain amount of iron at a certain depth. And that's like the roguelike piece of like learning, where does iron spawn? How do I find it more regularly, even in this random world? And the biomes are different. And so there's still some level of like joy in the midst of the randomness, but Starfield's randomness is not joyous. It's just wasteland.
Yeah.
And No Man's Sky had more of these. I mean, it still has some of these issues, but there's at least a lot of stuff to see in No Man's Sky now compared to when it came out. But like, it's still this idea of like, well, I can go to a planet and there are animals there and there are plants there, but I know they're all just haphazardly placed in random combinations of things. And that just makes it, again, it's lacking that human touch. And that somehow makes, even though it's this massive world, it makes it feel sterile and empty at the same time.
Yeah, I think hollow is the way that the thing you just described. Hollow is the word that comes to mind.
Yeah. So
And
we've
and I
gotten
think,
incredibly off topic of puzzle games, but it is a very
oh,
interesting
sure.
topic of, even with puzzles, like how do games figure out, do we want to procedurally generate anything in this, or is it all handcrafted? And you might be able to pad playtime, but is it worth it?
Yeah, and I mean, like, there is a really cheap trick that you can do, which is to say, okay, you have this, like, I'm just making something up. This is not in relation to any of the games we've mentioned, but like, say there's a code to a door that you have to punch in order to open the door. You can make that code randomly generated, and you can kind of make where it spawned randomly generated, but now you're kind of playing Clue, like literally the game Clue, where it's like, get to this one spot and then you put
Uh-huh.
so is that fun? I think that is a question that you're gonna have to answer at development time. But like, you can put some randomly generated elements into this, but I would be very careful.
Yeah.
I think The Witness did some of that. But yeah, so like I don't know, like when it comes to actually making these puzzles, there is one sort of effect that happens when you play these games. And this is something that I'm also curious what your opinion is, or if this is something you did. And that is, do you ever metagame? Like, what would I, the designer, do if I had to make this puzzle here? Oh, and then you can figure out the solution. I'm curious if that's part of your sort of play style too, because I do that a lot. And I'm just
Oh
like, oh,
yeah, I
yeah,
mean, there were times. So when I was playing Blueprints with a friend in person, I would do something and they would suggest like, oh, and this person has less experience with video games than, they haven't been just like a gamer their whole life kind of person, and they would say something and I'm like, no, that would be too ridiculous of an ask, so I don't think that's the solution. Like
yeah,
I would very much filter. And that's kind of what's also fun, is when I'm wrong about that. Like, that's an enjoyable experience for me, is when I was like, oh, I guess I was wrong. And that can be its own fun thing. But as someone that's
it's
played a
happened to me
billion
several times
games,
in the past few weeks.
what's that?
That exact thing has happened to me several times in the past
Yeah.
few weeks.
And I'm like, no, that'd be crazy. They wouldn't ask me to do that or remember that or write that
And
down. And
then,
then they do. And I'm like, ah, but it definitely, I am metagaming in puzzle games of like, what would be a completely unreasonable thing. I might have an idea, but then I throw it out the window because it's like, well, that would be too much. Like, and back to Mario Maker puzzles, like Carl would sometimes know that's probably not a solution because it would require me to have a
right,
timing perfect jump. And that would be like incredibly, they call it Kaizo levels of difficulty, like where the players have to do like these pixel perfect jumps on like, perfect, the frame perfect timing. Like,
frame
that's
perfect,
not
pixel perfect.
reasonable to ask a player to do that in a puzzle level. So that's probably not the solution. And
Right,
so he's constantly filtering, is this maybe the solution, through the lens of, is it reasonable ask of the player?
right. And it's also sometimes they'll find cheese. And in
Mm-hmm.
this case, what cheese means, it has a specific definition. It's finding a solution to a level or puzzle or whatever that is not the intended solution and kind of circumvents what was going to be a fun experience. And I say that in quotes, fun experience, because maybe it is or maybe it isn't. But that's another thing that sort of ends up in the sort of metagaming sort of
Yeah.
category of things.
But yeah, I
So
think metagaming is an interesting approach, and I think it's hard not to. Like,
yeah,
you either choose to just go with your gut, which is metagaming at all times, or you choose to deny that. But either way, you're still doing it. Like,
it's hard
there's
to
no
not
way
think
to
about.
not know what you know about video games and not apply
Yeah,
it. So
yeah,
it's an interesting dynamic, especially as a designer. Like, how do you build an experience that works for both types of people? Because there are people who don't have those metagame experiences that would connect to things they already knew. So yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, we're gonna wrap up the podcast here. This has been a really fun chat, Galdoc.
Indeed. No, I love this sort of topic. And I know it's not our usual factory game thing, but as it turns out, and you may not know this as the audience, but we're humans. We do, in fact, have more than one interest. And I know that might strike some of you as, oh, what, more than one interest? Turns out that yes. And this is one of them. This is one of the threads in my life that has been very, very important to me. So,
Yeah, and
yes,
like we said, we think that as listeners, a lot of you have, I mean, even just looking at the Twitch comments, a lot of you clearly enjoy puzzle games, and a lot of you listeners on the audio version of the podcast, I'm sure, do as well. So hopefully you've heard about some new titles in this cast that you've never heard of before. Again, I'll put most of them in the description of the video and the podcast. Galdoc, thanks for hanging out. Always a good time.
indeed. Thank you so much for having me.
And as usual, at least this is the current plan. With everything being in flux right now, please join the Krydania Discord if you want updates. I will always post that to the announcements channel if you want updates on my life and stuff that's going on, because there are some question marks in my future. But for now, we are planning on the podcast on September 1st, as usual, the first and third Monday of the month. And that's at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time, which I think is 3:30 p.m. UTC. And I will update the Discord if there are any changes to that. As always, if you have any questions, ideas for topics, or ideas for guests, head over to the Krydania Discord and let me know there. I'll put a link in the description. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Always remember, the factory must grow.
Take care. Thank you so much.